This is just a quick sort of synthesis discussion. Since we're not planning to walk out of here with any specific to-do or action items, this is just an opportunity for a couple people to just synthesize kind of what they heard, what the takeaways might be, and we're going to start with Guylaine.
Thank you. So three ideas that I would like to share with you. At the point you are where you're thinking about the future of ROAAr, which is a very exciting program and an important moment for the future of this sector of our McGill libraries. One thing that I think we should, I will propose that you keep in mind, and I think it will stay with me as well, is what Tom told us this morning about the decline of humanities. I think I would keep that as a leitmotif to try to answer questions like how to make humanities relevant without adopting a justification discourse. We cannot use those words, of course, but how to make humanities meaningful and life-changing, because it is really what it is, what they are, by having students experiencing our collections and really seeing the world differently, about how to put humanities and our collections in the path of our students and our users in general, to help them understanding the complexity of our world and any difficult questions they have to deal with. And it is certainly what humanities help us to do. But there's, with everything that is happening and what we read and what we listen to, there's something we all feel I think we must do. So how, in each of our institutions, the positions we have with the collections we have, how can we make this happen? Establishing partnerships, engagement, we saw many examples of that at different levels, with students, with faculty, with administration, with community. This is certainly something to look at. So that was my first point. The second one is something maybe we did not talk as much as maybe it's the beginning of another conversation. Is how in Montreal, in Quebec, but in Montreal in particular, how could we develop collaborations and partnerships with other heritage institutions? We had, it's our librarian and archivist of Canada, Guylaine, a few months ago in January, I think, who gathered us in Toronto to talk about plans. And I was shocked. I'm not saying anything about what is happening in Quebec, and actually I don't know any clown project, certainly not in Montreal, where we have wonderful institutions and colleagues who are ready. I won't name any one, but we all know the names, and they are all ready to start working and establishing partnerships. It is what we do all the time. So what about reaching out to the Montreal Museum, the BANQ, our National Library in Quebec, McCord, the public libraries, and all the others, and think about a project on a theme, maybe on history of Montreal, Indigenous nations in Montreal, maybe working on developing an exhibition that could circulate in our public libraries. Creating a Montreal GLAM project / network is my second idea. And things are changing so much. And I love this slide that we saw with the square wheels. It really, it's exactly what is happening. So when we have to embrace that change, we know that, we all know that, but it's so difficult to do. And with the obstacles that we see in our institutions, this type of sometimes barriers we see between the administration and the professionals and the staff, where actually we are all working for the same cause and we're all part of. I'm a university librarian, I'm a provost, but I'm often saying to my colleagues that I'm a librarian every second of my life. even if I'm wearing an administrative function. When we're talking about all those changes, inevitably the question, what are we going to stop doing, comes. And I'm wondering if we should just drop that question, because we will never be able to answer it. It's too complex. Nobody will want to stop doing something they love doing, or just because they've been doing it for 20 years or 15 years or even 5 years, they won't want to stop it. And you know what, I'm the first one. I don't want to stop doing these things that I love doing, that I find important. So maybe we should simply prioritize with what our users consider we should be doing for them. Then comes, how do we know about that? And yes, we talk among ourselves about the future of archives, but what about bringing our students, members of the communities, and faculty members with us, and listening to them, and starting with that. And the stop doing things list may simply be something that we will look back a few years later and publish our stop doing things list. So those were my 3 things that I wanted to share. And thank you again for the organization of that. It's really great. Thank you.
So one of the things that Guylaine just said made me think, in terms of GLAM and other partnerships, especially in a large community like Montreal, when I first came into the archives and library profession in the United States, all the rage was documentation strategy in the United States, at least. There were a lot of publications in the late 80s, early 90s about documentation strategy, and then it didn't quite work out the way everybody envisioned, and I think a lot of it was driven by trying to find grant funding to do things, and it just sort of got dropped. But I think there was a lot of wisdom in the literature on documentation strategy about organizations working together and finding kind of common themes around which to build outreach, collection development, things like that, and common ways to not compete with each other. I mean, that was really one of the key things about documentation strategy, was not to have everybody trying to build the same collections at their university or their institution. So I think maybe it's time to revisit that literature and rethink it for the 21st century. I just wanted to say 2 things that I think resonate for me today. One of them is that there's a lot of exciting, we heard so much about outreach possibilities, outreach actualities, things that people are doing to engage various communities on and off campus. But I want to go back to sort of a fundamental from very early today that Tom Hyrie talked about, which was just like, that's the glamorous part of what we do, and building relationships with donors. Sometimes the unglamorous part of what we do is like arranging and describing this stuff so that people can use it. But a fundamental reality is, if we don't have tools, in the 21st century, if we don't create tools that allow people to figure out which things they want to use, and that force them in at very high levels, at the level of the creator of the film, when they don't know who that person is, and I'm thinking about, we talked a little bit about university archives and ways that they're used. So one of the collections that I use most in teaching, and this sort of ties back to the 60s and Guylaine's presentation earlier, are the records of Kingman Brewster, who was the president of Yale during the 60s, okay? And if you want to teach anything, the Vietnam War, civil rights in the United States, if you want to teach anything, his records are rich because stuff was happening on the Yale campus and he was dealing with it and he was documenting it, and his administration was documenting it. And of course, it's from the perspective of the Yale administration, but that's a really interesting way to teach, sort of getting students to think about, well, whose perspective are you reading on this and whose are you not hearing from? It's a really good teaching tool for using primary sources. But
most of those students don't come into this class knowing who Kingman Brewster was or what was going on at Yale in the 60s. So it's really through being able to keyword search across our finding, and we have a clunky finding aid database. Like, I was around when we created it 10 years ago, and it's getting an overhaul in the next 6 months, and we're gonna have a new interface. But I live and die by it. I mean, I use it all the time because there's no other way to get subject access about what's in, 500 box archival collections without good descriptive control. So one of the things that for me is that with all of this aspirational stuff, we really do have to do that difficult work of and not overdoing it, right? We've learned through, at least in the US, through MPLP and Mark Green and Dennis Meisner's really revolutionary work at getting us to look at our own obsessions with doing everything perfectly. We've learned that we have to do something, and that we can't build up 20,000 linear foot backlogs because we can't do everything perfectly. So I think balancing that, the desire to, it seems like a challenge for McGill is to balance the desire to do exciting new programs, but also to be doing that really unglamorous hard work of getting things out there, getting information about collections out there so that people can use it. And then finally, the other thing that I heard over and over again as a sub-theme is starting small. So many of the things that people talked about today were not about we're not about developing big programs and launching them, but really starting with small outreach efforts, starting with small engagement with teaching and things like that. I mean, Lance's career moving from general instruction and reference into special collections a little bit at a time, and really proving that there's a need for this, and that there's a market for this, and that you can really develop a program, I think is really, really good. The other thing I really appreciated about, and so this was not the first time I've heard Lance talk, so I full confession, but one of the things I love about what he's done at Cornell is just this. We often are focused on specialists in special collections because we love ourselves and we love our collections to death, and we often have curators who have very legitimate, deep knowledge about collections. But most of the people who, at least in my experience, most of the faculty and students who come to us are not specialists. They're generalists looking for generalist help in introducing 18, 19, 20-year-olds to the research resources, the very rich research resources that are at Yale, and the very rich research resources that are at McGill. So starting small and not focusing so much on the big, but starting initiatives that are small and that can build community, I think are really important. And I heard that over and over today. I probably am conditioned to hear that, but I did hear it over and over again in the things that various presenters talked about. So thank you.
Just absolutely amazing. There's a ton of smart people in this room, and as I was wandering around listening to the discussion tables, I was floored. You guys had lots of creative ideas. They just kept going. We kept trying to get you to go to break, and you didn't want to get up, and I was just so excited about that. So one of the themes I heard today was intentionality, and you're going to have to believe me that I wrote that down on the paper before Jonathan used that. So I even tweeted it. You can check. So the importance of connecting what we're doing, our collecting strategies, our outreach strategies, to the institutional mission, to something important going on campus, to something larger than ourselves, so that we're working towards a larger goal. Maybe it's in Montreal, maybe it's across Canada, maybe it's just with certain faculty on our campus, but that we really know why we're doing what we're doing, and we prioritize our work because we have a reason to do so. I heard a lot today about needing to support activity, experience, interrogating collections, having two-way conversations, that we are not the experts sending people information, that the students and the researchers coming into our archive, we don't sit them down and talk to them, that we're having a conversation. That that's the way to engage our communities. And that's the way that's going to help us answer the question, what stories need to be told today? You know, as we heard from Jenny first thing this morning, we're starting to think about collections in a different way. And we're thinking about what stories need to be told today versus what stories we were telling from our collections 5, 10, 20, 50 years ago. And those are different communities that have not been represented in our collection before. Something else I heard was to draw, and this is along the same lines, is to drop the elite, both in ourselves, thinking of ourselves as the elite, imparting knowledge onto others, but also to drop the notion that it's only the elite people that belong in our collections, that we need to be finding those extra voices. We heard a lot about community today and how that relates to, say, non-custodial models. I was struck by the mention that perhaps dealing with the indigenous community, that would be a non-custodial model, that's challenging to us, but maybe very much the way forward. And that we should start thinking about our role not just as taking care of things, whether print or digital, but fostering that engagement. And in Montreal, dealing with the community, might mean dealing with some LAM institutions in the city, like we heard from Guylaine, or different, just community groups out there. But in Montreal, especially for McGill, we have a challenge to reach out to the Francophone community. It's something McGill doesn't always do very well, and our Francophone institutions can really help us with that, and it's something we need to get on our radar. I heard ourselves come full circle with Gwen's story from quoting a speaker from a recent symposium she went to, asking what is a primary source, and it took us all the way back to our first talk of the day, starting to think what we collect and what we consider evidence and why we have certain things in our archive. And the very last thing that struck me is the importance of creativity and fun. This was the first time I've heard Lance speak, and I was prepared for it because Bill told us about him before he recommended Lance to invite him in. Lance, your enthusiasm just drips off. It's infectious. And every time I walked out there past the sketch notes that Greg made this morning, there were 3 or 4 people just in wonder looking at them, laughing, talking about them. And if we love our jobs that much, if that creativity and that passion for what we do infects us, it's going to infect our users. It's going to come out in our teaching, it's going to come out in our community partnerships, it's going to come out in the way we talk to researchers. And I think we always have to remember we're here, the most of us, because we love this. That this is what we do and this is important to us. And I think that's what's going to keep us going forward through this transition. Keep creative in our jobs and make sure we're here to have fun. So thank you, Lance.
This enthusiasm is infectious, isn't it? And I knew we were coming to the end of the day, and I assumed our energy would be flagging, but it feels like it's going in the opposite direction. So apologies if my tone was a bit off, but I am going to be repeating some things because I think we're hearing some consensus around various issues, but I went to some trouble to try and phrase it slightly differently. So I'm going to make 3 points here. First of all, thoughts. Second of all, thank yous, and last of all, what we're thinking about, which is towards the future. So the 3 T's. And first of all, my thoughts and my takeaways are in alphabetical order. Number 1, think puppies, not guard dogs. Both Toms today urged us to create engaging spaces that say, please come in, not, are you sure you should be here? Lance said he couldn't find images of our spaces here at McGill online, and that's true. It's because there are none. First of all, this space is actually new. We thank some donors who gave us enough money to do a renovation last summer. So had you come a year ago, we wouldn't have been able to have this particular occasion in this particular space. And if we're honest about it, it's a Band-Aid. We are still in a capital campaign for a new building, and we are looking for a larger space so we can welcome even more people, because we tend to fill this space for most of our events. But the other reason we haven't put that online is because we hadn't really thought about how to address the issue of people who might be uncomfortable coming to our kinds of spaces, and that was coming out today. Tom Scott gave a really good illustration with the welcome of some wayfinding online. You know, this is what it might look like if you came to an event. This is what things people might wear. This is what it might feel like, to give a sense of tone and familiarity to it. The other thing we heard is that it's important to create online portals that speak to diverse communities. Use stories that engage, visuals that appeal. So actually listen carefully to what users want to find and try and come and meet them, you know, with what they would like to hear and see. Second thought, be road runners, not slugs. Or I'm actually going to switch it to a more Canadian metaphor. Ski fast and lean into your turns, don't snowplow. In other words, be where people are. If they're using Wikipedia, go there. If they're going to create digital material, be prepared to harvest it. If they're moving out of their houses and downsizing, as are those who made Montreal's history in the 60s and 70s, then Guylaine told us we should be ready to find ways to hear and gather those kinds of stories. Third thought, ski wisely, don't go off-piste. Ski with intention. And says Jonathan, if you do venture off onto new hills, enjoy the scenery and engage actively with other cultural and linguistic neighbors. My metaphor got mixed there. Sampling beer and opera along the way. Right? Aspire to inclusivity, not assimilation, urged Gwen. Think meaningfully about post-custodial models, including with relation to gift agreements. Bill and Lisa both talked about identifying and being honest about our institutional missions and being willing to say no. They said that. I didn't hear a lot of examples of when they said no, by the way. Rosemary and Tim told us to nurture our relationships with our institution's general counsel to help us define what we understand to be our particular piste, so as not to go too far off-piste, at least by mistake. And last thought, be questers and don't get bogged down in quagmires. Don't get bogged down in collecting just because that's what we've been collecting and cataloging in a particular way because that's how we've cataloged before. Don't plug gaps, but seek out new material and then figure out how to organize it and make it available. My second T, the thank yous. And here I'm actually going to ask people to identify themselves. Jenn and I really want to thank our host team, Jacquelyn Sundberg. Can you stand up, Jacquelyn? Not everybody's in the room because they're out preparing a reception, but her team consists of Marta and me, Mugen. I'd also like to thank our volunteers. There's Laura. Do thank He's note-taking. And Mary, who's outside preparing the reception as well. And I'd also like to thank Greg. Greg, I think everyone has probably heard about you, but they may not have seen you. Greg, our sketch noter at the back. I'd also like to mention our communications officers. I don't know if they're still... Marika, she is. There's Marika and Lauren. Could you stand up, both of you, please? We're so lucky to have these amazing communications officers who support us when we do crazy things like this kind of a day. So thank you very much to Marika and to Lauren. And to all of our speakers for sharing their ideas and insights. We weren't sure we could convince such illustrious colleagues to come, to be honest. And we started making phone calls. We had no refusals. So we had a full house today of people who came out, and we are so grateful to the kind of generosity that we heard from you and for the fact that you helped participate in the day. And Last but not least of the thank yous, our thanks to Bill for animating the day. You did a terrific job. It was really great. And to Jenn for suggesting him in the first place. You're welcome. Now, towards the future, as you notice, the title of today changed. It used to be the Nerve Center Colloquium. We were all carried away with metaphors. We decided that wasn't what we were doing. It was ROAAR and more towards the future. But it's a bit daunting. We've been talking about the future, and we've been admitting that we have certain qualms about this post-custodial model, and also the notion of working together across boundaries and across communities. So let me tell you what we heard today, or at least what I heard. Lance, by the way, gave us a very modest suggestion. He said, be awesome. Right? Rosemary told us of hosting punk rock bands. Lisa of hosting dance and theater in her spaces. Tom Scott told us about the power of art to animate science and medical collections. And all these contribute to our growing sense that ROAAR's mission is actually to create moments of discovery. And so we are not sure how we're going to do it, but increasingly we're thinking that that's where we need to go as a GLAM consortium of units, and that we are trying to create these moments. And that's what I was hearing today, different ways that a number of you have tried to create that. The gauntlet has been laid down for we McGill folks, but also for all of us hoping to roar ahead into the future. So. Just a general thank you to everyone for coming today and for participating so generously. I think if we go outside, we're going to find a reception with some eats and drinks, and if not, I expect if we mill around for 5 minutes, we probably will. Huge thanks, and enjoy this terrific weekend. It's a wee bit cold, but you've got Montreal in springtime, so can't get much better than that.